our CHAOZ study ended up finishing up last year. We've submitted our final report. So this is just a summary of everything. So the PIs on this project were myself on passive acoustics, Brenda Roan on visual surveys, Jeff Knapp on Zooplankton, Phyllis Stabino was oceanography, Nguyen Wang did our climate model, and Chris Clark is working on our noise model. So CHAOZ stands for the Chukchi Acoustics, Oceanography, and Zooplankton Study and was funded by BOEM. And our objectives were to document the distribution and relative abundance of marine mammals in the lease areas in the Chukchi, and to relate the changes in those variables to oceanographic conditions, prey availability, anthropogenic impacts, and also to develop a climate model. We had 3 field seasons from 2012 to 2015, or sorry, 2010 to 2012. We had 3 long-term mooring clusters deployed, which collected everything from nutrients and oceanography all the way up through zooplankton and marine mammals off Icy Cape. We also had 6 biophysical sampling station lines with CTDs and net tows, a real-time auto detection buoy, and we also did underway visual surveys and passive acoustic monitoring using big eyes and sonobuoys. So really quickly, our key findings for oceanography were that we discovered that there's this current that goes to the northwest out of Barrow Canyon. 30 to 50% of the transport through Bering Strait goes past our Icy Cape line. And also that Atlantic water was seen as far as Icy Cape, mostly in our inshore mooring site, which is about 40 miles offshore, a little bit less on the 70-mile offshore middle site. In addition to the ice algae that falls to the bottom, there was lots of subsurface phytoplankton blooms, and at the moment, continuing past CHAOZ into our Arc West project, Jeff and Phyllis are trying to determine how much secondary productivity this does fuel. Calvin Morty's work has found high ammonium concentrations on our Point Hope and Icy Cape lines, and I'll come to that again when we get to the marine mammals. And then also the ice kills in the Icy Cape line were often greater than 20 meters deep, and that's in waters that are 40 meters. For zooplankton, there was high interannual variability in the community composition, lots of concentration on the bottom. There was evidence of up-canyon transport along the Wainwright line, and also evidence of on-shell evection with Caelinus hyperboreus being seen on the shelf. And also there was lots of variation in the temporal vertical migration patterns among the sites. As far as euphausids go, the adults and the juveniles had their highest concentrations in 2012, but there were still low numbers, so no evidence of a conveyor belt theory bringing these guys up from the Bering Sea. The Furcilia had orders of magnitude concentrations bigger than the adults and juveniles, and they were present at all stations, and no consistent warm-cold differences in their presence. The Caloptopes had high concentrations in 2010, and Jeff is suspecting this might suggest the evidence of spawning in the area. Hyperd and gamma amphipods had concentrations similar to the adult euphausids. Copepods, ointhonas had the highest concentrations, but pseudocalinus were very abundant in all years. To marine mammals, from our long-term passive acoustic recorders, for bowheads and beluga whales, not surprisingly, we found that they undergo predictable seasonal migrations, which are strongly correlated with month and ice concentration. For bowheads in particular, we found that their culling activity ceased when ice thickness got greater than 1/2 meter. The culling activity was correlated with winds from the south-southwest, and we saw trimodal distribution patterns in their culling activity in the fall of 2010. And there's also a call they may call the gunshot call that was correlated with ice formation. For beluga whales, there's 2 populations that move through the area. My former postdoc, Ellen Garland, is still working on their repertoires. And just to note, our Icy Cape line is very close to Cassigliac Lagoon, which is an important molding and breeding lagoon. Also with the long-term acoustics, we found high numbers of walrus calling both winters on the offshore Icy Cape site, and that's 110 nautical miles off Icy Cape. We had 1 detection of a ribbonsill in April in the inshore site. And we also had several instances of vessel detections on our offshore site. From our sonobuoys and visual surveys, we found that gray whales were strongly correlated with the prey availability. This gets back to Calvin Morty's work on the Point Hope and Barrow lines. And not surprisingly, the bearded seals and walrus like the same shallow offshore areas with high benthic biomass off Wainwright and Icy Cape. And although our visual surveys were done opportunistically, Brenda Rowan was able to compute some relative densities for these 4 baleen whale species. Because we did the sonobuoys and visual observations at the same time, we were able to compare our techniques. And we got comparable results for these species, although no belugas were seen or heard with either method. For these species, visual surveys did much better, and also visual surveys can detect Harper porpoise and Dall's porpoise, which are beyond our capabilities for our sonobuoys. But the subarctic species, passive acoustic, did much better. Getting on to anthropogenic impacts. So Chris Clark is still working on his noise model for the Chukchi Sea. He has already determined current ambient noise levels and been able to compare that with things like wind speed to be able to predict future levels. They did deploy their auto detection buoy in the fall of 2012, and mammals and noise were detected. And our hope with this is that it can be used as a system to mitigate cumulative noise impacts in the future if industry ever ramps back up again. Wei-Yin Wang did our climate model, and her reports for ice coverage are dismal, just like everybody else's. What she found, though, is for ice thickness, there was large interannual variability in ice thickness, no significant trends there. And her models predict late arrival of ice in the fall and early ice retreat in the spring, and this latter is more important because it permits greater solar heating into the system. And besides the ice, she was able to model other oceanographic parameters, and this is an example of ocean currents. So this is from top to bottom, the inshore to offshore icy cape sites, and the black lines are her predicted magnitude and direction of ocean currents, and that is compared with the red, which is Phyllis's measured magnitude and direction of ocean currents in those 3 sites. So it did really well. So what we did as a part of our final report is come up with some future predictions based on Wei-Yin's modeling and the correlations we saw. And our results are consistent with recent publications predicting a regime shift in the Chukchi Sea, and evidence suggests that this shift has already begun. So we came up with 2 scenarios based on winds, low and high winds, and we found from the marine mammals that generous feeders might be okay in either scenario. The specialist feeders, especially like walrus, will not do so well. And that Chris found that ambient noise levels will increase in either case. So that brings me to, so CHAOZ is done, and ArcWest did their final season. We did our final season last year, but we're rolling this all into what we are calling the Ultima project, which is the Arctic Long-Term Integrated Mooring Array. And it's going to do the same thing that CHAOZ and ArcWest and CHAOZ Extension has done, and it's going to continue the work started under all those projects. And this is just a map of all the moorings we've had in since 2007, basically going from Cape Halkett in the Beaufort Sea all the way down to Unimak Pass in the Bering Sea. And we will be going out this season to do that. So there's my acknowledgments, and I will take questions.
Oh.
8 minutes, I think.
Thank you, Catherine.
Hi. Catherine, this is Kathy, and I had 2 questions, actually maybe 3. So the first one is, who's going to be funding the Ultima?
Phyllis got some money from NOAA to do the cruise, and so we're hoping to get some more money from BOEM to be able to, we had some money left over from our one project that we can at least turn the moorings around on, but I've been doing other projects, just applying for funding in other cases to be able to analyze what we've already collected. So for example, what we've had out in the Bering Sea, our right well project ended in 2010, but we've been collecting data since 2007, and we've got some money from IFAL and the Marine Mammal Commission, and just recently we got some NIFWF money to have an analyst go through those data. So my kind of, I'm just trying to turn things around and get the data, because if you don't collect the data, then you don't have the data, and then just try to figure out how to get the funding to analyze it in the future.
Yeah, I get it. And then the second question is really interesting talk, and I know that all the PIs have probably given it, numerous times in different settings, but would you guys be open to maybe doing, an expanded set of presentations for this working group sometime? Because I find it a nice picture of the Chukchi Sea area.
Yes, I think people would be. And I do know, to follow up on some question that was asked of Ian, so Carol Ladd I think, has already submitted her paper on Polynias. Basically, it's a CHAOZ through ArcWest gathered data for that, and I know Phyllis is working on that one current turning to the northwest paper as well. And we've got several of the marine mammal ones in the works.
And then my third question is when I know that, you were talking about that you've been collecting stuff for, since 2010, and I know even earlier than that. How have you guys interacted with communities, not to let them know when you're coming through on a boat, but have you been able to do any like educational outreach stuff?
Yeah, so we typically give talks in Nome when we're going through there, and to be honest, not too many people show up for those things. I had 3 show up for my presentation this past fall, and one of them was asleep. So and I've gone up to Barrow and given talks there as well. So that's kind of hard to find that you hear that they want to hear it, and then you get there and nobody shows up. The other thing is that we started a long time ago, myself and Kate Stafford, this Hydrophones for Hunters project. So we were hoping to be able to take advantage of traditional knowledge by providing very small little dipping hydrophone kits to the hunters that they could take along while they're hunting, and if they have any downtime, be able to dunk it in and say, okay, this is what we're recording, this is what we're seeing, we're expecting ribbon seals to move through now, or now the bowheads are coming soon, and to have that information with the recordings, but that kind of fell through and we lost our kits. So I'm still always looking for somebody in some community that would really enjoy taking that upon themselves to do. I think it would give us a lot more information on our long-term recorders, because we're not out seeing what is making the sounds while we're recording. So I still have hope for it, but not very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Catherine?
Yes, this is Betsy Baker. Thanks, Catherine. That was great. I've seen other presentations, and it's every time I see one to see the added information is helpful, and I would echo Kathy's request to have a more detailed presentation. You showed 4 different whale species, but then I heard you mention right whales. Are they part of the study as well, or did I not hear that correctly?
Sorry, I didn't hear what whale you said. You cut out at that point.
The right whale.
Yeah, we listen for right whales, but we do not. We have not detected any in the Arctic. The question for us is how far up in the Bering Sea they go. So we have actually. Let me go back here. We have recorders sort of around the St. Lawrence here. So these ones here, we're wondering if they are going up there. So we are analyzing those recorders for it. But all of our analysts, when they go through, they are listening for all the species sort of in that frequency range. So if they would be there, they would note them.
Okay, and I guess.
But we're not expecting them to be in the Arctic.
Yeah, neither am I.
Yeah.
I guess you had mentioned a study maybe involving, or are these all forthcoming publications for the?
Yeah, so all these, can you see my screen still?
Yes.
All these recorders here were deployed originally for our right whale study, and we've just kept them going. These red ones are Phyllis Stabeno's Oceanographic moorings, so we just put a recorder on it. And so we finally got funding to actually look at what animals are on these moorings. So that's the right whale project I was talking about. It's not necessarily Arctic, but just saying the Ultima project includes those moorings, and we're hoping to scramble some funds to be able to analyze them.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Catherine, this is Guillermo. Early in the presentation, you mentioned summer phytoplankton blooms. Were those consistently associated to any atmospheric and/or oceanic conditions?
I have no idea. That would be a question to direct to Phyllis Stabeno.
Phyllis. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions for Catherine?
Catherine, you mentioned that NOAA is funding some of the project. Do you know which office?
I have no idea. Phyllis got some money to do the cruise, and that's all I know.
Is that OER?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I do not know. Sorry.
Thank you so much again for your time, Catherine. That was very informative.